What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you each and every Monday and Thursday by the Hockey News. I am your host, Emma Lingan. I cover the Nashville Predators here at the Hockey News. I'm joined, of course, on this Thursday by my wonderful co-host, Michael Augello, who covers the Buffalo Sabres here for us at the Hockey News. And as usual, we've got lots to talk about today, but before we do dive into all of today's bite-sized storylines from around the NHL, do want to let you know that we are brought to you by our good friends at Sticks.com. Hey, hockey players, why drop a fortune on your sticks when you can snag pro-level composite sticks at Sticks.com? That's Stix.com. These all black beauties are made for sniping, saucing, and shutting it down, all while looking sharp on the ice. And the best part, prices start at just $85.13 US for a 3-pack. Yep, you heard that right. Elite sticks without the elite price. Hit up Stix.com. Again, that's Stix.com now and gear up without the markup. Let's go. Michael, John Tortorella officially out from the Philadelphia Flyers. He was fired Thursday morning, although depending on who you ask, I think a lot of people would say really he fired himself based on the comments he made after their loss to the Maple Leafs. Brad Shaw is going to be stepping in as interim head coach in Philadelphia for now. It was Tortorella's third season with the team, and they're still rebuilding, and that was understood, but they clearly weren't trending in the right direction, at least not to his liking. So when we talked about this earlier this week, actually, when we were talking about Rick Tocchet and his future in Vancouver, does this sort of clear the way, do you think, for Tocchet to become the next head coach in Philadelphia, or what do you kind of see happening there?
First of all, if you're going to make a comment like that, don't make it in Toronto, because it will just gather a momentum and a life of its own. I get the feeling he fired himself, although by them firing him, he gets to collect $4 million on his contract next year. I've looked at the Philadelphia situation and thought that it was a wrong fit from the word go, because Danny Briere, when he came in as general manager, said rebuild, the R word. And the R word does not belong with John Tortorella. John Tortorella wants to win. So the first thing that Danny Briere should have done, and maybe he didn't have the power to do it when he got hired as general manager, was fire John Tortorella. Because if you want to rebuild and you want to finish in the top 5 and get franchise cornerstones, he's going to work against you because he wants to win. And last year they were in the playoffs until the beginning of April and then trailed off because they overachieved. This year, I think they sort of resorted back to the norm because they have large gaps in their lineup, and they didn't have their number one goaltender in Carter Hart for obvious reasons. So, it's a situation where now Bradshaw comes in, finishes off the season. I seriously doubt he's going to be considered as the heir apparent. They'll do a search, but depending on the situation in Vancouver with Tocchet, like we discussed earlier in the week, if he decides he wants to go someplace else after everything that happened with JT Miller and Elias Pettersson in Vancouver, I would think he's the leading candidate to go and be the head coach of the Philadelphia Flyers.
Yeah, certainly does seem like a good fit there. And as far as what comes next for Tortorella, do we think that he's coaching again for another team next year, or is he back on TNT or TSN or one of those networks as a commentator?
I think you could see him as early as the playoffs on one of those outlets because he's been a coach all through this season. He has experience matching up with these teams that will be in the playoffs. I don't know. He's 66 or 67 years old. I think he's 67. That's getting a little long in the tooth. I still think he has something to contribute, but I just don't know whether it would be behind the bench. I think this is probably his last stop, and he's probably going to do some media. He did it before with TSN for a very brief spot. So But I just don't know if I see another team giving somebody who's going to be collecting Social Security an NHL coaching job.
Yeah, fair enough. Not sure I see an ideal fit for him either. Moving on, though, Jakob Chychrun signed an 8-year extension this week with the Washington Capitals. So that extension is worth $72 million. That's a $9 million AAV. He's only 26 years old. He turns 27 in a few days here, actually, but he's got a career high in points this season with a Washington team that has really defied a lot of expectations as a whole. You know, he's got 18 goals, 43 points, or 43 assists rather, for 65 points. So looking at that, it's a relatively small sample size, I think. Do you think that this 8-year, $72 million extension is a smart long-term commitment for the Capitals? And before you answer, for context, with that 9 million AAV that Chychrun's going to be making, for context, Cale Makar is making 10.6 million this season as part of a 6-year deal. So it's really not that far off. Do you think that this is an overpay for Chychrun, or do you think that it's smart?
I think it's a symptom of the increasing cap and the fact that he would have been a UFA at the end of this year and he was having a career year. I think, he has 18 goals. He's having a revelatory year when you look at the fact that he was minus 24 with Ottawa last year. Now he's plus 30 with the team that is, tops in the Eastern Conference. The thing with Chychrun has always been durability. He has struggled with injury issues throughout his career. The last 2 years, he played all 82 games with Ottawa last year, and he's been healthy all this year. So, knock on wood, maybe he's gotten past that in his career. I think part of this is the fact that John Carlson, who's the number one defenseman, is 35 years old. He's got a year left in his contract. Probably after that, he retires. Although, it's not impossible. He decides to stick around. But, you have a situation where Chychrun now slots in as the big money earner on the blue line. And maybe Carlson in the latter part of his career will agree to take a lesser salary if he wants to stay around. But I think that was a factor here. And, really, Chychrun has been an offensive driver for this team. So, if I was him, I would have taken the 8-year deal. And I'm sure there are a lot of critics around the league that he got paid $9 million. But I think the numbers you're going to see for a lot of defensemen, if they have a chance to hit the open market, the number is going to go up.
All right. Well, speaking of the Washington Capitals, we've all been focusing on Alex Ovechkin for obvious reasons. He's now 6 goals away from breaking Gretzky's all-time goal record. But there are a few other Gretzky records that actually could be within reach over the next few seasons. Records like the most 100-point seasons. Gretzky has 15. Connor McDavid currently has 7. And then the most 60-goal seasons. Again, Gretzky has 5. Austin Matthews already has 2. So it doesn't look like Matthews is going to be getting another one this year. But again, if we just sort of look into the future here, which of those records do you think is going to be the next one to fall?
Well, imagining anyone to get 800 points. The fact that Gretzky had 15 is just obscene. And the fact that McDavid already has 7 and he's in, I think, his 9th season is pretty impressive. But simply by the numbers, by the probability, Matthews getting 60 goals 3 more times to tie Gretzky is more likely than McDavid staying healthy for 8 more years and scoring 100 points. So I would say Matthews has a better chance, although, Matthews with his injury history this year, he's barely going to score 30 if he does. He could very easily bounce back if he gets whatever is bothering him corrected. And he's in his I think he's 27 years old. So, yeah, I think Matthews has a better chance, but I mean, nothing is impossible with these guys. They're both just scary talented.
Yeah, you are right about that. All right. Let's talk about someone else, though. Bobby McMann, great story. He hit the 20-goal milestone in just his second NHL season in that 7-2 win for the Maple Leafs over the Flyers, that after which John Tortorella essentially fired himself. So McMann was an undrafted free agent out of college. He played at Colgate. He played 2 seasons between the ECHL and the AHL before eventually getting a shot to join the Leafs in the 22-23 season. He's got 1 year remaining after this year at a $1.35 million cap hit. How valuable is that contract for the Leafs right now? And you know, do you think that they could have anticipated getting this kind of production out of him?
I don't know if they could have anticipated this, because he scored 15 goals last year, and this year he's reached 20 for the first time. I think they saw the potential in him. I believe he scored 20 goals in the American Hockey League in not a big number of games. It was 24 goals in 61 games. I mean, you saw the scoring touch at the AHL level, but it's another thing to achieve that going to the NHL. Now, he's benefited from playing at times in the Leafs top 6 with Tavares. He's playing with Tavares and Nylander right now. So, and he's been able to convert that into goals. But his issue, like Chychrun, like we spoke about before, has been staying healthy. He's had a rather checkered injury history, but again, he has been able to avoid that. And that contract, especially when you're paying $40 million plus to 4 players in Marner, Matthews, Nylander, and Tavares, when you're paying somebody who's scoring 20 goals, making less than $2 million, that adds up. They're probably going to have to pay him a lot more after next season, and they may have the room to do that depending on what they do with John Tavares and Mitch Marner this summer.
Yeah, definitely going to be an interesting summer for the Leafs regarding those two guys, particularly Marner. I'm not sure that we see him back in Toronto next year, but we will have to see. All right, heading south to my neck of the woods, Nashville. GM Barry Trotz had a one-on-one interview with Pierre LeBrun this week. Talked about what's been obviously a very disappointing season for the Nashville Predators. Regarding the multiple trades and signings and waivers and other movement that's happened during the last calendar year in Nashville, Trotz said, quote, "I don't regret anything. We had a lot of guys that I would say underperformed. That's a reflection of the whole group," end quote. So while Trotz may not regret anything, certain moves that he has made, you know, on the surface at least, look to be better than others. And so obviously, this being the team that I cover primarily, I have my thoughts on this. But Michael, want to ask you first, just from an outsider's perspective, any moves that you've seen Barry Trotz make this over the last calendar year that you think really didn't make a lot of sense?
Let me count the ways. Well, first of all, to say that you don't regret any of them just is sort of bizarre. I mean, everybody has regrets, even when you're having a successful season. And this has been a season of, I think, disastrous for the Preds. I don't think he should regret the signings that he made in the summer. I still think Steven Stamkos has something left. I think Brady Shea is a very good defenseman. I think Marchessault still has something left. So I wouldn't regret those. I think he should regret the Askarov deal, because I didn't think they got enough for him. I still think he's going to be a number 1 goaltender in this league. I think he handled it poorly in the sense that he should have traded him before he signed UC Saros to the 8-year deal to allow him a little bit more leverage. He sort of had to trade Askarov when he signed Saros, because we know how it played out, where Askarov was not going to report, or was not going to, unless he made the Predators, he was not going to play. I think the sort of short-sighted one was the Dante Fabro waiver. He has played very well in Columbus. He's a right shot defenseman. He's in his mid-20s. It wasn't working out, but I don't know how you could not have traded him for a draft pick to let him go on waivers and let him get claimed by Columbus. I mean, Columbus is very happy that he was on waivers and they claimed him. So that's free money. And that's something that I think a more experienced general manager maybe would have had the patience to wait and to maybe get something out of that trade, out of that situation. The one that most recently is head scratching is the Schenn Novak deal, because we know that Novak was not playing particularly well there. He had 2 more years left in his contract, but he was rather desired last year for the way he played when they made the playoffs. And even though Luke Schenn is in his mid-30s and maybe coming to the end of it in his career, he still had value, enough value that Kyle Dubas flipped him for a 2 and a 4. So why couldn't have Barry Trotz done that? So, none of these are, moves that will kill you, but it's death by 1,000 cuts. And sometimes death by 1,000 cuts is enough to kill you.
Yeah, I agree. I think that none of these individual moves are necessarily going to be franchise altering for the Predators, but again, some of them, the optics have been better than others. I will say with the Askarov situation, I agree, but I do think that Trotz was sort of painted into a corner there. I think that, a lot of it was not his doing. I would say that the issue was that the Predators probably shouldn't have drafted Askarov in the first place, but that's a David Poile problem and not a Barry Trotz problem. So I think he did what he could in that situation. To me, the biggest issues that I've had with the decisions that Trotz has made this year have been the Dante Fabro on waivers. I think that was a horrible idea. I think that I always felt he was sort of misused in Nashville. It didn't really make a lot of sense. He was either on the top pairing with Roman Josi or he was a healthy scratch. It was like they never played him up and down the lineup. It just really didn't make a lot of sense to me. But he was very effective on that top pairing with Roman Josi. So again, even if you didn't like him as Barry Trotz for whatever reason, I agree. He certainly had value, could have traded him and gotten something in return. And then the other one that really, really is not aging well, at least in the early term, is the trade of Alex Carrier to Montreal for Justin Barron. Again, did I think that Carrier would make or break this Predators team? No, but I also think that Justin Barron has been a straight up liability. The one thing that you get there is cap space, and you're not tied to Barron beyond next year. So there's, a little bit of wiggle room there. Again, you're not doomed for the long haul, but I do think that, those are the big ones. I mean, when your top pairing right shot defenseman is Nick Blankenburg, that should tell you the situation. And I mean, no disrespect when I say that, because Nick Blankenburg does a lot of things very well, but under no circumstances should he be a top pairing defenseman in the NHL. So I think that tells you the kind of situation the Predators are in, and why Barry Trotz did say on local radio here in Nashville this past week that he is planning to go out and acquire a veteran right shot defenseman to play alongside Roman Josi. So that'll be an interesting one to look out for this offseason. But moving on, speaking of teams that are not doing well this year, obviously Nashville being one of them, looking at the bottom 10 teams in the league right now, Michael, let's try not to say Nashville. What do you think of the teams that are sort of making up the bottom third-ish of the league? Which ones do you think are the closest to contending?
Well, I won't say Buffalo either. I would say the Anaheim Ducks, because now I think they're going to end up trading John Gibson in the summer, even though we've been saying that forever. And they'll probably get a decent return because, as we've talked about on previous shows, the goaltending market for the summer is not deep. It's Jari, it's Gibson, maybe Demko, maybe Devin Levi, depending on how things work out in Buffalo. If not him, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. So, they'll get a good return. But if you look at the Ducks, I mean, you're talking, young talent like McTavish and Leo Carlsson and Cutter Gauthier. I think they benefited from the addition of Gudas on the blue line, and then they get Trouba from the Rangers. So you've got some leadership there. They've got some players in their mid-20s like Troy Terry. I just think the pieces are there. They may be a coach away. I'm not sure about whether their coach can lead them to the promised land, but I think the talent is there. And then they have Seneca, who they drafted last year, who I think is a talent. So there is an accumulation, and defensively, Mantukov and Lacombe, they really have a lot of talent on the blue line and up front, and it's just sort of putting it all together. They may need one veteran player to help them, but I think they're close. I think they're going to make the playoffs next year, and that's the first step for any one of these teams to reach contender status.
Yeah, I think the Ducks, I did just see them play Nashville twice here in the last couple weeks. I mean, they look dangerous. They're young and they're fast. And talking about being a coach away, I am by no means reporting anything, but just some food for thought here. I happen to think that Andrew Brunette would be a perfect coach for this Anaheim Ducks team. And the kind of system that he wants to implement, it requires a lot of skating, a lot of speed. That's something that this Ducks roster certainly can provide there. So I do think that they have a very bright future, and they're close. They're knocking on the door. You can tell. All right. Dylan Holloway been having a really good season with St. Louis. He's got 24 goals, 60 assists, or 60 points rather, in 73 games after putting up just 9 points in the last 2 years with the Oilers. So right now he's on a very team-friendly contract for his production. So 2 years at $2.9 million AAV. He's only 21 years old. So with how great of a success story this offer sheet situation has been for St. Louis, do you think this is a sign that we're going to see some more offer sheets, some more action there this summer? Because I feel like it's something that we always talk about. Oh, offer sheets, it's always so exciting, but they never actually happen that often. Do you think that's going to change this year?
Oh, would it be so? I think they'll be more common than they have been. First of all, this was just a complete brain cramp by the management of the Edmonton Oilers. They were really up against it in terms of being right up against the cap. They ended up trading Cody Ceci to clear space, and then they didn't match the deal. So I didn't understand what exactly they were doing. Now, Broberg had not played a lot in the NHL, and there was a lot of question of whether he would put it together, and he's having a decent season. There was less doubt about Holloway, even though Holloway hadn't done it at the NHL level. I think you said 9 points in each of the last 2 seasons. Now he's blown up in St. Louis. It was opportunity. He's getting top 6 opportunity. He was never going to get that in Edmonton. And I don't understand why he wouldn't get it there, because there was room to do it, but they just didn't seem to want to do it. And he's getting that opportunity in St. Louis. Now, as you said, the 2-year offer sheet, he's got a year left in that deal. Then he's a free agent with arb rights. And I believe he's under control for 2 more years. So really it's 3 years, and you'll have to pay him if he has another big year like this year. But, to get a player like Holloway for, I think it was a 2nd-round pick was the compensation, is an absolute steal. And I do think it's going to have ramifications in the league. Now, you already have seen, teams sort of being proactive. Look at what Dallas did with Wyatt Johnston. He was an RFA. He would have been eligible for an offer sheet. Dallas was proactive and signed him right after they made the Rantanen deal. They signed him to a 5-year deal. I think it was $8.5 or $8.4 million. I think Toronto is probably going to be very proactive when it comes to Matthew Nyes. They're up against it with Tavares and Marner. Nyes is going to have a 30-goal year. They're probably going to have to pay him $7.5 million. I think they'll gladly do that because he's going to be probably a cornerstone player for them. Teams that are right up against the cap are going to have to be proactive and defend themselves against the possibility of an offer sheet. Otherwise, they're going to end up at Edmonton and having their back against the wall.
Definitely. All right. Well, you mentioned the Rantanen trade with Dallas. So let's talk about the trade deadline for a second. It is late March and we are still not done talking about the trade deadline. In your opinion, Michael, which deadline acquisition, maybe one of the major ones or one of the sort of under the radar ones, so far, it's only been a few weeks, but so far, which one would you say has fit in the best with his new team?
Come on, Emma. It's Mark Jankowski. 6 goals in 8 games. I mean, you can't make it up here.
Mark Ovechkin. Yeah. It's insane.
It's ridiculous. I mean, I've seen, Mark Jankowski was in Buffalo. He played in Calgary. I've seen him for a number of years. He's not this player, but sometimes a player just gets hot in a new surrounding, and that's what's happening. But if we talk about mere mortals besides Mark Jankowski, I would say Dylan Cousins. 7 points in 8 games with Ottawa. He was -2 in his return to Buffalo on Tuesday. But, he's at a point per game pace, which is a lot better than he was doing in Buffalo. I think it was 31 points before he got traded. I think he needed a change of scenery. There was a lot of pressure on him here. I was in the scrum with him on Tuesday, and he said, I signed here long-term. I wanted to be part of the solution. It just didn't work out for him. And it seems like it's right now is working out for him in Ottawa, who, unless they collapse, will make the playoffs for the first time in 8 years.
Yeah, definitely. Well, obviously, Mark Jankowski, of course, just blowing us all away. Again, I don't think that we can count on that level of production for the foreseeable future, but it is nice to see for him. He does a lot of things really well, so happy to see him succeeding. I'm going to go a little under the radar and say Cody Glass has been a very nice addition for the New Jersey Devils. He's got 6 points in 8 games. I think that he had struggled to kind of find his way ever since he was initially traded by Vegas because he didn't really fit in with their timeline. He dealt with injuries, things like that. It is kind of nice to see him getting some confidence and being part of a solution there. Now, whether it will be a long-term solution remains to be seen. Obviously, New Jersey dealing with injuries this year being a big part of that. But I do think for what they've needed from him at this time, I think that he has done very well. Now, flipping that on its head, which trade deadline acquisition, again, in the early going, has not worked out as planned, in your opinion?
Well, you remember how Secretariat in the Belmont Stakes was won by about 20 lengths? Scott Lawton of the Toronto Maple Leafs is the winner of that one. 9 games, 0 points, -5. He was acquired to be a third-line center. He got moved down to the 4th line, playing the wing. He's feeling the pressure of, playing in his hometown. It's been not a disaster. That's overstating it, but it's been a disappointment because the Leafs wanted him to be that 3rd-line guy to be able to move Max Domi to the wing. That has not worked out. I mean, there's still time for it to work out before the end of the regular season, going into the playoffs. He's an experienced player, and he's got another year left on the contract. But right now it's disappointing. And the runner-up, I would say, is Josh Norris with Buffalo, not because of ability, but availability. He's been chronically injured the last few years, and he played a grand total of 3 games before becoming injured again. And apparently it was something that lingered from his time in Ottawa, but that had to be a consideration when you were trading Dylan Cousins for him, because for him to be effective, he needs to be on the ice. And right now he's not on the ice.
Well, speaking of Buffalo, we are going to wrap it up here today with a question about your Buffalo Sabres, Michael. Lindy Ruff got his 600th win as a head coach this week. So, obviously, fired by New Jersey in March of last year. The Sabres brought him back for what has been his second stint with the team. He's under contract with Buffalo for next season as well. Obviously, the positive results have not come for Lindy Ruff this time around with the Sabres. Do you think there's a chance that he is part of a turnaround for this Sabres team? Obviously not this year, but next year or potentially even beyond.
He wants to be part of the turnaround. He's got another year left in his contract, and I don't think that the Sabres are going to push him out the door. I also think one of the factors here is Don Granato, who they relieved to bring in Lindy Ruff, had a 2-year deal, and they're still paying him even next year. So I don't think they're going to fire Lindy Ruff and then pay 2 ex-coaches and hire a third one. So that's always a factor. But he wants to be part of the solution here, and I think one of the things. Yeah, he compared the Sabres to like an old car and looking under the hood and finding out what was working and what wasn't working. And now maybe after 60 some odd, almost 70 games, he's got an idea of what works and what doesn't work. It's a question of whether, Kevin Adams will be the one to go to Pep Boys to get the parts because, there are major issues with this team in terms of how they play defense, in terms of them being too left-handed on the blue line, in terms of whether Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is a true number one goaltender, whether Tage Thompson is better at center or the wing. I mean, there are all these things, all these factors, and it's taken Ruff a significant amount of time to sort of feel his way through this team and get a handle on things. I think he wants to return. I think he will return, but I don't know whether anything will significantly change unless they significantly change the core group of this team.
All right, good stuff. Thank you, Michael. That is going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you, as always, Michael, for talking hockey with me today. Thank you again to Stix.com for sponsoring. We will be back with an all-new episode next Monday. We'll see you then.